Okay, welcome to this presentation workshop video. In this video, we're going to try and support you with some top tips of how to develop an effective presentation. Now, one of the first things that you might consider is your background and text color. Trying to provide some consistency for the people watching your presentation, but also some variability so it doesn't become too boring or too dull for them. And trying to find the right balance with this can be quite difficult. So what you don't want to do is have every single slide with a different background color or different design, but also at the same time, you don't want every slide to be exactly the same. Now, what we need to try and contrast is light and dark where we can. So for example, we might have light letters on a dark background, such as white on a black background, or we might flip that and have dark colors on a white background. Pastel colors as a background color tend to be really good for people who are dyslexic. So you might have a light green or a light blue or something like that. And certain colors do not go well with each other. And that's something we would need to consider both within designing the presentation, but also how that then looks when you blow your presentation up onto a much larger screen. So for example, if you've got color blindness, so red and green color blindness, this will be particularly difficult to read. But even if you haven't got color blindness, reading red text on a green background can be really, really difficult. Again, how clear is this? So using a yellow color font on a white background, something to avoid. Now, what looks okay on your computer screen when you're building your PowerPoint often looks very different on a projector. So you need to make sure that you check your presentation and the colors of the background and the text color on a larger screen before you submit your presentation. Now, the change in screen size often makes the colors, which seem to match quite well on a smaller screen, far less visible. Again, that's something you should check. Now, in terms of offering some simplicity, this isn't a golden rule that you must follow, but to keep it simple, you might follow the 6 by 6 by 6 by 6 rule for slide text. So the first 6 stands for a maximum of 6 lines of text. If we start putting too many lines of text on, it can be quite difficult for the reader. And actually, it might draw the reader's attention towards just reading your PowerPoint and not on listening to you or watching you. The second 6 stands for a maximum of 6 words per line. So not only are we talking about 6 lines down as a maximum, we're also talking about making sure you've only got 6 words on a line maximum, which essentially avoids you having lots of small text, almost paragraphs on your PowerPoint. So the key here is not to fill your PowerPoint with too much detail, but instead of filling it with too much detail, you can use things like handouts, or you can talk through the additional detail. So our focus watching is on you rather than on the PowerPoint slide. The third 6 stands for maximum 6 seconds to understand the slide. So 6 down, 6 across, but also if you didn't talk and I just looked at your screen for 6 seconds, I should be able to understand exactly what you're trying to get across in that slide. So again, not trying to overfill your slides. And the final 6, your text should be readable from about 6 steps away. Now, bearing in mind, we're probably going to be sat further than 6 steps away, so it needs to be readable from a lot further than that. But as an absolute minimum, you should be able to take 6 good steps away from your screen and comfortably read what's on your presentation slides. Now, if you're struggling with that because you've got a lot of content to go through, if you look at this example here, all 6 slides are on one slide. What you can do is break that down into several simpler slides. So for example, we've now got one slide for each of those as was presented in this video. Now, good presentations are those that grab the audience's attention. In addition to that, they're those that get the information across to the audience, the key information, not paragraphs, just the key information that you're trying to present. Good presentations are those that get to the point and don't waffle, and they're really concise, and they're well prepared and well rehearsed. So you may get together before. In fact, I would suggest you get together before your presentation and rehearse it, practice it, check the timing, because you need to make sure you don't overrun and you have your 10 to 15 minute window. So if you're finding that suddenly you're 15 minutes in and you haven't finished, we may stop you and you won't get an opportunity to deliver your entire presentation. So you need to make sure that it don't overrun, but at the same time, you're not 3 or 4 minutes in and finishing and having that awkward feeling of, well, we probably didn't prepare enough. So you should practice this. Now, this is one example of how you might present your design. So not only have I delivered some information to you there, but I've put that in a presentation design, which essentially is bullet pointed. Now, what we could do is we can design that very differently. So the exact same information here about getting the attention, communicating, rehearsing, preparing, not waffling, and finishing on time is delivered in a more visual way. So this is the second example of how you can deliver exactly the same presentation, but have less text on your slides. You may have a handout in front of you, a script almost that you're going to read from, or some notes where you can verbally expand on each of those. Now, a really good design that you can use, which is built into PowerPoint, is this design ideas up here. Now, to get to this, you'll need to click on design at the top and then go across to design ideas, and then it will bring up some pre-prepared built-in designs that you can use. For example, this may look slightly different. So if I go back 2 slides, this is how I made it look. Just by using the design function, we've made it look slightly better. Again, another example, so we put a border around it instead. Now, going back to the basic slide where I just had lots of text, again, if we go through design ideas, we can find very quickly that even with lots of text in our slides, we can change it just to make it look a little bit more appealing. Or another example here, again, it looks slightly more appealing. I would still urge you to have less text on your slides than this, but you could change the design so it doesn't feel like sentences or just a report on a screen. Now, in terms of your text size and font, it's really important that you try and make any titles that you use a larger text than your body text, because the title is obviously the standout and the first thing that will appear, and essentially the first thing you want us to look at as the viewer of your presentation. Ideally, you should only use a maximum of 2 font styles per slide. If you start to use too many font styles, it can distract the reader and actually it'd be quite difficult to read. So you're aiming for some consistency with your text size and your font. You're looking for consistency with your font and background color and to make sure that it works, and particularly once you look at it on a projector. And fancy fonts, as great as they might be, can be very difficult to read in a presentation. So personally, I would steer away from fancy fonts where possible. Now, this is a 44 font at the top. This is typically what a heading might be. It might even be slightly larger than that. And you're probably watching this on a laptop or a tablet or a phone. If you had a look at this on a projector, you would see the actual size of a 44 font, and that's what I would urge you to do. Now, this is probably nearer your heading. Your text size probably should be somewhere down here. It could be a size 32, but typically it would be somewhere down here. What you should avoid is text that is size 22, 20 or lower. So it should be 24 minimum, where possible. Now, the other thing you need to consider is not just the text size, but the text font. So we're aiming for serif fonts or sans serif fonts as much as possible. Now, people with dyslexia can find it easier to read sans serif fonts. Sans serif fonts are things like Arial, Calibri, and Calibri is the preset. So when you go onto PowerPoint, when you open up any Word document, it will be set to Calibri, or Tahoma, Verdana, or Comic Sans Serif. Avoid other fonts, they're difficult to read, but they're also inaccessible for people with dyslexia. Now, in terms of animations and transitions on slides, animations can be really useful, and some of the positives, and by animations I mean the text appearing like this at several different times. So you click through, so you can click the next piece of text to come on. Now that stops the audience from racing ahead, because the danger of a PowerPoint slide with information on is me as the viewer of your presentation. I might have read everything that you're trying to get across, and you might be expanding on the first point. So what I'm reading is very different to what you're saying, and there's that disconnect. So you can keep the viewer, the audience, on track with you by using animations effectively. So it keeps them focused on what you're discussing. Also, the audience may refocus as the word appears, because it can be quite easy to drift off whilst watching a presentation. So if you've got animations coming in, each animation may bring that audience member's focus back to your presentation. Now, some of the negatives, if we look at lots of fancy animations being used, that can actually be quite distracting. So we may not actually read what's coming through, and we may get distracted by animations that look very fancy. So will they focus the audience on you, or your slide, or both? And you need to figure out where you want the audience's attention to be. Now, you could also use handouts. In fact, you should consider using handouts, but your handout shouldn't just be a very large report. So it might be something visual like a graph or a report. And if you do use a handout, it should be something that you refer to, not just something you give over to the audience, because actually you probably haven't got enough time to deliver everything, so you'll get the rest out in a handout. Any handout you use should be something you refer to in your presentation. Now, because of COVID, you won't be able to physically give any handouts out, but you will be able to send your assessor by email any handouts you want to use, and we can have them electronically, so you can refer to them in that way. So what now? You need to build your presentation in your huddles. So that's in terms of the planning and the preparing, and the assignment brief and the marking framework for your presentation are all on Learning Space. You've got some options of how you do that. You might use Google Drive, you might use Office 365, and those platforms allow you to build your presentation at the same time. For example, all members of your huddle group could all be logged on their own laptops and could be editing the PowerPoint at exactly the same time, and it updates because it saves on the cloud, so you can see the changes other people are making. Once you've done that and you're all happy and you're all ready, you need to submit that onto Learning Space. We will show you where later on, closest to the deadline, but you all need to submit your presentation onto Learning Space. So Tuesday the 13th is your set presentation support session. So with that, please bring laptops, because we're not in a computer room. And what we're going to do in this session is kind of look at what progress you've made so far and try and provide you with some support about how you can develop that further. 2 days later, we've got our assessed presentations. So really that support session on the 13th should be the kind of final touches, and any feedback you get, you've then got the rest of that Tuesday and the rest of Wednesday to make your changes, to then submit it by Wednesday evening or Thursday morning. You then have your assessed presentations. You'll be given some times closer to the date, but your presentation will be to me or Phil as your assessors, plus one other huddle group, and that's to be arranged. So 10-minute presentation, but with the flexibility of going up to 15 minutes. If you have any questions about your presentation or you require any support, please come and talk to us as often as you need to. Thank you very much.